Okay, hi guys. We are going to talk about revision today because this is our revision unit. So there's two types of revision that I want to talk about, global revision and local revision. So you will be required to do both types of revision, both global and local revision in your Unit 4 project. But what exactly do I mean by global revision? What does that mean? So global revision is really large scale, whole paper kind of revision, all right? So this means anything from like rethinking the entire paper, right? Rethinking your thesis, rethinking your argument, rethinking how you approach the assignment. In really extreme cases, it could mean starting from scratch. You don't necessarily have to do that much revision, but that is part of global revision, sort of just rethinking your whole approach to the assignment. Global revision also involves large-scale restructuring, okay? Moving around paragraphs and sentences and just reorganizing how the entire paper is structured. Global revision can also mean writing completely new material that wasn't there before, and most importantly, cutting old material that doesn't work anymore, okay? So all of these are parts of global revision, and yes, you need to do global revision on your paper in order to fulfill the terms of the Unit 4 assignment. So you've got to figure out, how are you going to do some large scale revisions, right? Do you want to rethink your whole approach to the paper? Do you just want to move some things around? Do you want to try adding material and cutting out some material? What's sort of going to be your approach for large global revision? Um, here's some more strategies to think about when thinking about how to approach global revision. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this is going to look different for architects and for gardeners, all right? Architects, usually start with a very clear structure in their heads, and then their paper follows that structure. So architects might feel more resistance to sort of moving things around or restructuring things because it already fits into the pattern that they had planned before the paper was written. Gardeners, on the other hand, might have a little bit of an easier time potentially with global revision because they've discovered their point and their purpose as they've gone along. And so maybe after they've written the paper, it makes more sense to them that things need to be moved around, that things need to be cut or added or whatever. But even architects can do this kind of work. So I have a series of questions here that I want you to ask about your paper that you're revising. So first, is the thesis or argument or point the one that I want to make, right? Is this the story I want to tell, especially for Unit 1? Or think large scale. Is there a better argument to make? Is there a better point to get across? Is there a better story to tell? Um, I'm not saying that you should necessarily uh, restart your paper from scratch. That's you probably don't have time for that, and it may not work to your advantage anyway. But definitely think about how you're approaching the assignment and if there's anything major that you would like to change about your approach. Ask yourselves, is this the best way to organize my ideas? What are other possibilities for organization? Okay, even you architects can think about this. Um, is there a way to like recombine my paragraphs so that the points are more clear or more separated? Or would it make sense to move one of these paragraphs up to the top because this is the main argument that I'm making? There's all sorts of different pieces of advice out there about how to add emphasis to something, but generally when it comes to um, I'm thinking your Unit 2 formal paper, you want to make your strongest arguments first, okay? So if you have a paragraph that's really strong analysis and that really fits with your thesis really well, you're probably going to want to put that paragraph up towards the top. That's going to be your big focal point paragraph. And then if you have some smaller points that are maybe not quite as strong, those can be towards the bottom before the conclusion, right? So think through questions like that about your organization. What are other stories in Unit 1 or other pieces of evidence or other points that I could add to this, right? Like what has been left out or what would strengthen this? Do I need to do a little bit more research? Do I need to think of some other stories or some other strategies if we're thinking the rhetorical analysis, some other rhetorical tools that I could have mentioned that could be added? And then also, just as importantly, what can be cut, right? Maybe you've got a paragraph that really, like, it wasn't making a good point, it was sort of weak analysis, or it just wasn't contributing much. Maybe you need to cut it and you need to find something else to add in its place. Okay, so those are all the questions to ask. Okay, so I have an example from my own writing to show you. This is what I've been working on this semester, my dissertation. I'm getting a PhD. So I've been working on, let me exit out and show you what I've been working on. I've been working on chapter 3 of my dissertation, right? So this was my first draft of my dissertation, and obviously I'm not asking you to read through this carefully, but I just want to show you. So I start off talking about dreams. This is where my chapter 3 starts off. I talk about dreams. I have a quote from A Midsummer Night's Dream. I move down, and you can see I have some headings here. This heading is called Playgoing is Dreaming. Scroll further down, I have a heading that is, let's see, lots on Playgoing is Dreaming. Then I have the linguistic versus material science, that's another heading. And then further down, I finally get to reading is dreaming, all right, and my paper continues on. Well, I submitted this draft to my advisor, and we talked about it, and we talked about what my real goals were for this chapter, what points I was actually trying to make, and I decided that there was actually a point right in here, okay? A point that I'm making right in here that really, so what page are we on? We're on like page 7 here, okay? So finally here about page 7, I start developing this really interesting idea that after talking to my advisor, I recognize this needs to be more higher up in my paper. It needs to be the start of my paper. So I came back and I started reworking my paper, and I want to show you over here. So I tracked my changes now. And here's the start of my chapter again, and everything in red here is new, all right? So I started with a completely new introduction. All of this is new. All of this stuff is brand new, completely wrote all of these new. And then actually right here, it's still calling it new, but this is material that I had written before, but I've now moved it up. So all of these paragraphs here had already been written, but they've now been moved up. So you see now I've gotten them to page 2 and to page 3 instead of being on page 7. Now you'll also notice, look, I have a new heading here. I've had to completely reorganize the sections of my paper, and I've got a new heading. So this new heading is linguistic interfaces. This part's new here, and oh, look, we finally get to some of that old stuff where I was talking about dreams, quoting A Midsummer Night's Dream. I've got some of that dream stuff here, but you see I took that part out. All of this is a little bit new or rearranged. I've moved some of this stuff around. It's all different. And then I get into some more of my old stuff. But can you see how extensive these revisions are, right? Like lots of new stuff, lots of things completely moved around. And this is just part of the writing process. This is just what good revision looks like, right? You write through it and you figure out where things need to be, what new stuff needs to be added, what old stuff needs to be cut. There was plenty of stuff that was cut. Okay, let's talk now a little bit about local revision. What do we mean by local revision? Well, hopefully you can figure that out. If global revision is about big stuff in the paper, local revisions on a smaller scale, more at the sentence level, right? What I say here, at the sentence level. Now, in the revision and editing module that I had you guys look through for both Unit 1 and Unit 2, I talked about just revision versus editing. And here I'm using the terms global versus local. Okay, so terminology isn't so much important. Just know that editing is actually a subset of local revision, subset of it, okay? So like I say here, it includes editing for grammar, but it's so much more than that. It also includes revising for clarity, style, and flow, all right? So this is where you are actually tinkering at the word and at the sentence level, trying to make your writing clear, trying to make it powerful, trying to make it pretty and good writing. So some things you want to be thinking about with local revision, or just some suggestions. There could have been a million suggestions here. These are the ones I'm giving. Think about your sentence variation, all right? This is cherry on the top kind of revision, right? When you get to think about just the nuts and bolts and how your writing is working at this small level. So really boring writing has sentences that are on average the same length, just over and over and over again. That kind of writing feels repetitive. So look through your writing and maybe I had a writing instructor even who made us count the number of sentences and how long each sentence was per page so that we could get a feel for if we had good sentence variation or not. Think about that. If you have a bunch of long sentences in a row, maybe think about breaking up one of those sentences. Or if you just have a lot of shorter sentences or sentences that are about the same length, consider combining some of them into longer sentences. Just the idea is to get some variation in there, and it makes your writing feel more interesting and flow better. Okay, this is another piece of advice that is just like cherry on the top, kind of makes your writing really nice, and that's avoiding to be verbs. So is or was or were or being, and this can be really hard, but even in formal academic writing, to be verbs are just so dry and boring, and if you can use more interesting verbs or more interesting construction, do it, okay? And then that last piece of advice there, play around with your structure, play around with your word choice. Try to get your writing to just be a notch higher than it is right now, okay? So here's an example again from my dissertation, all right? This is the way it was in my original draft, and I'll tell you right now that when I write my first drafts, they're usually really bad. Like I'm not thinking about good writing, I'm not thinking about pretty sentences, I'm not thinking about any of that. I save all of that for revision. So you'll see this sentence, or these two sentences here from my original draft are not very pretty, or not very good in my opinion. So the experience of attending a play is full of sensory experience. I mean, I even use experience twice in the same sentence. That's so repetitive. It's just like not good writing. There is music, there are the actors' voices, there are the sounds of murmuring or applause from the audience, in parentheses, or maybe even louder verbal demonstrations, at least in the rowdy early modern theaters. Now, I just have so many to be verbs here. I've got is, are, lots of to be verbs, and the sentence construction is just not great. It's grammatically not great and not all that interesting and a little repetitive. So here's how I revised this sentence. Between the music, the sound and fury of actors' voices, the murmuring or applause of the audience, and the visual spectacle of lights, scenery, and costumes, the experience of attending a play provides a rich feast for all the senses. Okay, do you see how that's better? At least I think it is, right? I think it's a more interesting construction, and I was actually able to add in some information that I feel like was missing from my first go around about visual spectacle, which is important for the point I'm trying to make. And then I got rid of all of my to be verbs, right? My verb here is provides. Provides a rich feast for all the senses. So yeah, I think it's a much better written sentence, easier to read, more fun to read at least, in my opinion. Okay, now these are just a few suggestions for prettying up your writing, all right? I want to remind you of all the general revision and editing strategies that I mentioned in that module. Um, Find someone else to read through your paper and offer suggestions, all right? Find a friend, find a family member, find a roommate, and absolutely 100% go to the Writing Center. Make use of the Writing Center. They offer online appointments. It's super easy to sign up for one. Go to the Writing Center and get get a tutor to read through your paper. Do the reverse outline, especially if you are a Gardner typewriter like myself, right? And the reverse outline, you go through each paragraph and you ask yourself, what is the point of this paragraph that I'm trying to make? Okay? Really articulate that point. Then make sure that the topic sentence states that point. Then make sure everything in the paragraph actually supports that point. That's reverse outlining. Change your mode up, all right? Print it out, print your paper out. Don't just look on it as screen. When we just read things over and over and over again on a screen, our eyes can glaze over and we can miss important things. So try printing it out. Use a pen. Sit and actually physically mark the paper. Read it out loud. This one's one of my favorites. Just find a place where you can be alone and no one will think you're crazy, and just start reading your paper out loud to yourself. And then I do actually recommend using a service like Grammarly, especially if you struggle with grammar or sentence level construction. Okay, use Grammarly, or at the very least in Word and Microsoft Word, in Google Docs, they underline when sentences aren't grammatically correct. They underline when things are misspelled. Pay attention. Pay attention to those little nudges, and if they're right, take care of them. I do want to give the caveat, right, that um, our artificial intelligence, our programs, our algorithms for figuring out grammar, they are not as smart as a human brain. They do not get things right 100% of the time. So you still need to use your own brain and your own knowledge when editing, um, and take their suggestions with a grain of salt. They're not always right, but I have noticed that they have helped some of my students out immensely with improving their grammar, so I do recommend them, interestingly enough. Okay, now these were very, very generalized strategies here. For more specific strategies and suggestions and things to watch out for either Unit 1 or Unit 2, I do have a list of more of those specific strategies, which I'm covering in the Zoom meeting this week. So if you haven't yet, watch the Zoom meeting. If you missed that Zoom meeting, watch the Zoom meeting, because I will be giving very specific, paper-specific suggestions about common mistakes that I saw in many of the papers. So I hope this was helpful. Good luck working on your papers this week.